Case 3. Casey, plaintiff, versus Goulian. Where are we? The United States District Courts, more specifically, the District in Massachusetts. Starting with the facts. Plaintiffs bring a state law nuisance claim, alleging that defendants are involved in noisy and dangerous stunt airplane flights over their homes. The defendants removed this suit from state court on the ground that plaintiffs' claims fall within the court's federal question jurisdiction. What's the issue? Does the court lack jurisdiction over this suit? The holding. The court holds it lacks jurisdiction over this suit and allows the plaintiff's motion for remand. Let's look at some of the reasoning. This case introduces important terms and concepts related to the jurisdiction of federal courts to adjudicate disputes. Let's go over some of them. Starting with subject matter jurisdiction. This is the authority of a court to hear cases of a particular type or cases relating to a specific subject matter. For instance, bankruptcy court only has the authority to hear bankruptcy cases. Subject matter jurisdiction must be distinguished from personal jurisdiction, which is the power of a court to render a judgment against a particular defendant, and territorial jurisdiction, which is the power of the court to render a judgment concerning events that have occurred within a well-defined territory. Unlike personal or territorial jurisdiction, lack of subject matter jurisdiction cannot be waived. A judgment from a court that did not have subject matter jurisdiction is void. Subject matter jurisdiction, personal or territorial jurisdiction, and adequate notice are the three most fundamental constitutional requirements for a valid judgment. Moving on. Federal question jurisdiction. In U.S. law, federal question jurisdiction is the subject matter jurisdiction of U.S. federal courts to hear a civil case because the plaintiff has alleged a violation of the U.S. Constitution, federal law, or a treaty to which the U.S. is a party. Removal. In the U.S., removal jurisdiction sometimes exists for the defendant to move a civil action filed in a state court to the United States District Court in the district in which the state court is located. Generally, removal jurisdiction exists only if, at the time plaintiff filed the action in state court, the federal court had a basis for exercising subject matter jurisdiction over the action, such as diversity of citizenship of the parties, or where the plaintiff's action involves a claim under federal law. Remand. The remand court procedure is used by higher courts to send cases back to lower courts for further action. In the law of the United States, appellate courts remand cases to district courts for actions such as a new trial. Federal appellate courts, including the Supreme Court, have the power to remand a cause and require such further proceedings to be had as may be just under the circumstances. This includes the power to make summary, grant vacate and remand, or grant vacate or remand. Appellate courts remand cases whose outcome they are unable to finally determine. For example, cases may be remanded when the appellate court decides that the trial judge committed a procedural error, excluded admissible evidence, or ruled improperly on a motion. Here's the schematic, the flowchart, to show how things get remanded from the top down. Motion to vacate. A motion to vacate is a formal request to overturn a court's earlier judgment, order, or sentence. This typically involves an attorney filing a written legal motion for consideration by a judge. The defendants argued that a federal court should hear this case, not a state court. Let's dig into their reasoning. First, defendants argued that the plaintiff's state law claims necessarily turn on the construction of federal law. Defendants maintained that the plaintiff's claims turned on federal aviation standards, in particular those set out in the Federal Aviation Act, and its enabling regulations applicable to aircraft flight and noise. Second, defendants contended that federal aviation law completely preempts plaintiffs' claims. Defendants argued that plaintiffs' claims sought to use state law to regulate the airspace over their homes in contravention to the FAA, which expressly provides that the United States government has exclusive sovereignty of airspace of the United States. Let's discuss now the meaning of a private cause of action. A cause of action refers to a legal basis for a lawsuit. They are created primarily by legislatures, but also sometimes by courts. For example, the right to privacy is a matter of common law, while many crimes are statutory. The reason for this question is to highlight who has a cause of action, as the law might protect a class of people, but the protected class of people may not themselves have the right to effect or enforce their rights. We shall now describe the scope of authority the federal government has over airspace under 49 U.S. Code 40103. This law provides that the United States government has exclusive sovereignty of airspace of the United States. But there is no broad language in the FAA specifically prohibiting state and local governments from regulating air flight in any way whatsoever. And we have held that some state law claims relating to air flight may still have merit, notwithstanding the broad scope of the FAA. This case illustrates the difference between complete preemption and preemption on the merits, and whether conflict preemption, when presented as a defense, can serve as a basis for federal question jurisdiction. Complete preemption is a jurisdictional concept. Only complete preemption affects federal subject matter jurisdiction. Conflict preemption relates to the merits of a claim. It comes into play anytime a state law allegedly conflicts with federal law. If such a conflict exists, then the state law is preempted and must necessarily give way to federal law. The Casey Court relied on Seventh Circuit precedents in Voorhees to make the point that ordinary or conflict preemption is merely a defense to the merits of a claim. As such, according to the well-pleaded complaint rule, it does not provide a basis for federal question jurisdiction. The fact that a federal statute creates a defense to a state law claim does not necessarily mean that Congress has, by statute, taken the subject away from state tribunals and given it to federal courts. Rather, the court said, the question was whether, in enacting the Federal Aviation Act, Congress clearly intended completely to replace state law with federal law and create a federal forum, or more likely, if it only intended to provide a federal defense to the application of state law.